May of 2011, San Mateo, California. 26-year-old Michelle Hoang Tila came from a large, close-knit family. Her mother had worked as a nurse practitioner and became one of the main reasons Michelle wanted to enter the nursing profession. Michelle lost her mother to breast cancer while she was still a teenager and later decided to follow in her footsteps. She was especially close to her younger brother, Michael, and to her cousin, Christine Din. Michelle was known as someone who supported the people around her, helped her family, cooked, shopped, drove relatives where they needed to go, and was always ready to give advice. In 2011, she was enrolled in Samuel Merritt University's intensive one-year accelerated nursing program and was completing clinical training in the maternity unit at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward. On May 27, 2011, during her clinical shift, Michelle told a nurse that she was going to the parking garage to get something from her car. She walked toward the garage and did not return. Later that evening, her white Honda CR-V was seen moving through the parking structure at high speed. When the students were gathered at the end of the shift, Michelle was nowhere to be found. Her personal belongings had been left behind, her phone could not be reached, and her car briefly returned to the parking structure before speeding away again. This behavior was completely out of character for Michelle. Her instructor, Lori Rosa, became deeply concerned and began searching for her. By the following morning, there was still no word from Michelle. Her brother, relatives, friends, office offers, and later large groups of volunteers began searching, but she seemed to have vanished without a trace. Her friends and classmates were visibly distressed and insisted that something was seriously wrong. Investigators focused on the hospital parking structure. Human blood was discovered on the third floor near the area where Michelle had parked. At around 9 o'clock the next morning, Michelle's locked white Honda CR-V was found on Ponderosa Court, roughly half a mile from Kaiser Hayward. Her laptop and other belongings were still inside. Investigators also discovered an identification badge belonging to Samuel Merritt University employee Elaine San Augustine inside the vehicle. Michelle had no legitimate reason to possess San Augustine's badge. Investigators later learned that the badge had been taken from Samuel Merritt University the day before Michelle disappeared. This immediately strengthened the theory that the crime had been planned by someone who knew or had deliberately investigated Michelle's schedule. Police eventually determined that Giselle Esteban had used the stolen badge to enter restricted areas of the nursing school and search for information about Michelle. About half an hour after Michelle went toward the parking garage, a woman called the Kaiser Emergency Department identified herself as a nursing student named Michelle and asked to speak with her instructor. When told she had reached the wrong department, the caller asked that a message be passed along, saying that her father had suffered a heart attack and that she would not be returning. In the hours after Michelle disappeared, strange text messages also began coming from her phone. One message said that the phone battery was too low for a call, while another claimed she was on her way to Reno and was busy dealing with people who thought she was missing. More unusual messages followed. Friends were led to believe that Michelle had car trouble, that she had gone to Reno, that she needed a break from social media, or that she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. When people tried to communicate with her directly, the replies did not sound like Michelle. Her family refused to stop searching. The reward for information grew from an initial family-funded amount to $65,000 in June and later reached $100,000. More than 100 volunteers joined organized searches, dividing into teams and covering wide areas around the East Bay. As detectives examined Michelle's relationships, one name became increasingly important: Giselle Esteban, a former high school friend who had developed an intense hostility toward Michelle because of Michelle's friendship with Scott Marasigan. Michelle and Scott had briefly dated for about a month in 2003 after Giselle introduced them. But the romantic relationship ended quickly, and they remained close friends. Later that same year, Giselle began dating Scott. They eventually had a daughter together. Over time, however, Giselle became increasingly jealous of Michelle and convinced herself that something romantic or sexual was happening between Michelle and Scott. Scott repeatedly denied this, and the evidence presented at trial showed that he and Michelle had remained friends rather than lovers. Giselle's jealousy, nevertheless, grew into an obsession. Michelle did not want to abandon a long-time friendship simply because Giselle demanded it, and this became a constant source of conflict. When investigators questioned Giselle, she made little effort to hide her resentment toward Michelle. She complained that Michelle had interfered with her family and her relationship with Scott. Investigators then spoke with Scott, who appeared genuinely worried about Michelle and cooperated fully. He participated in searches and vigils, gave investigators access to his phone and computer, and showed them a long history of hostile messages from Giselle. In those messages, Giselle repeatedly blamed Michelle for destroying her family, insulted her, accused her of being involved with Scott, and made increasingly disturbing threats. Scott had also recorded arguments in which Giselle demanded that he admit to a relationship with Michelle. In one recording, she threatened to kill both Scott and Michelle if he continued to lie to her, describing threats as a final warning. According to the source narrative, Scott also said that Giselle had previously received psychiatric treatment and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Her behavior toward Scott became increasingly intrusive. At times, she appeared at his home without permission and entered the property. Scott eventually obtained primary custody of their daughter, which intensified the conflict. 3 days before Michelle disappeared, Scott sought court protection from Giselle after a series of incidents involving his home, his keys, and his computer. By the time Michelle had been missing for almost a week, police were distributing flyers and examining every possible lead. Investigators also briefly compared Michelle's disappearance with the earlier unsolved killing of another young nursing student, Phuong Le, who had disappeared in Fairfield, California. The similarities attracted attention, but police ultimately regarded a connection between the two cases as unlikely. Michelle's brother never believed that she had simply decided to disappear. She was known for staying in contact with her family and would not normally abandon her responsibilities without explanation. Police continued analyzing surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic evidence. Their hopes of finding Michelle alive became weaker when DNA testing confirmed that blood recovered from the parking structure and from the interior of her Honda belonged to her. On June 6, 2011, Hayward police formally reclassified the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide investigation. Michelle's family was devastated by the announcement, but refused to stop searching. until there was definitive proof of what had happened to her. Giselle remained the central person of interest. She was pregnant at the time and admitted that she had been at Kaiser Hayward on the evening Michelle disappeared, although she claimed she had gone there to deal with medical insurance matters connected to her pregnancy. During an interview, Giselle described Michelle as someone who had once been like a sister to her, but said their relationship had deteriorated because of what she believed Michelle and Scott had done. Police released Giselle after questioning, but continued watching her movements, and later placed a tracking device on her car. Investigators were convinced that she was connected to Michelle's disappearance, although at first they were still trying to understand exactly how the crime had been carried out and whether anyone else had helped her. Giselle was a petite woman, about 5 feet 2 inches tall, which initially caused investigators to consider whether she could have moved Michelle's body by herself. Michelle's father, Son Lay, traveled from Vietnam and joined the search for his daughter, publicly asking the community for help. Another important development came when Scott later discovered Michelle's white iPhone hidden under a floor mat in the back seat area of his car and immediately turned it over to police. Investigators were also examining the stolen Samuel Merritt University identification badge found in Michelle's Honda. Surveillance footage from May 26th showed Giselle at the nursing school. She had entered the school earlier that day, taken a faculty identification badge from an administrative office, and later used it to enter restricted parts of the building. Cameras showed her moving through classrooms and staff areas. Investigators concluded that she had been searching for Michelle's information and schedule. Phone records also showed that in the days immediately before the killing, Giselle repeatedly contacted both Samuel Merritt University and Kaiser Hayward while using false identity, asking questions, class of Michelle's schedule and clinical assignment. Cell phone records provided another major break. They showed that Giselle's phone was at the Kaiser Hayward parking structure during the hours before Michelle vanished, and that the two phones later traveled through the same general areas. On the morning after Michelle disappeared, went to an Apple store with a white iPhone and asked an employee to unlock it, claiming that her daughter had accidentally locked the phone. After the phone was reset, Giselle was seen using it. Later that afternoon, she went to a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant in Newark. At the same time, Michelle's friends and family were receiving strange messages from Michelle's phone. Investigators concluded that Giselle had possession of Michelle's iPhone and was sending messages designed to make it appear that Michelle was still alive and had left voluntarily. The physical evidence became overwhelming. Michelle's blood was found inside her Honda and on the heel of a pair of white sneakers seized from Giselle's apartment. Hairs recovered from the driver's seat matched Giselle, and Giselle's DNA was found on the steering wheel and turn signal stem of Michelle's vehicle. Surveillance footage placed a vehicle matching Giselle's Honda CR-V in the Kaiser parking structure before Michelle disappeared. Cell phone records showed Giselle using her phone there for hours. Even though Michelle's body had still not been found, police had enough evidence to arrest Giselle Dewag Esteban for murder on September 7, 2011. A forensic examination of Giselle's computer later revealed approximately 300 internet searches for Michelle's name. Some searches about unlimited some attack without her signature. finding someone who did not want to be found, following someone without being caught, and obtaining potassium chloride. 10 days after Giselle's arrest, on September 17th, searchers discovered Michelle's remains beneath dirt and brush in a remote area near the Pleasanton-Sunol border. Almost 4 months had passed since her disappearance, and decomposition was so advanced that investigators could not determine the precise cause of death. Michelle was identified through dental records. Cell tower data had helped direct search teams to that area because both Michelle's and Giselle's phones had connected to towers there. Shortly after Michelle vanished, the discovery ended the family's hope that Michelle might still be alive, but it also gave prosecutors the final confirmation that they were dealing with a murder. Giselle Esteban went on trial in Alameda County Superior Court in October of 2012. Her defense attorney did not dispute that Giselle had killed Michelle. Instead, the defense argued that the killing had occurred in the heat of passion and asked the jury to convict her of voluntary manslaughter rather than murder. Prosecutors argued that the evidence showed exactly the opposite: careful planning and premeditation. Giselle had spent months threatening Michelle, searched for her online hundreds of times, tried to obtain her address, stole an identification badge, entered her nursing school, searched for her schedule, called the hospital while pretending to be Michelle or a school employee, waited for her at Kaiser, and then attacked her when she went to the parking garage. Prosecutors argued that the blood evidence, surveillance footage, DNA, phone data, and subsequent attempts to use Michelle's phone all demonstrated a deliberate plan rather than a sudden accident. Giselle did not testify during the trial and showed little visible emotion in court. The prosecutor described Giselle as cold, calculating, and obsessed, arguing that Michelle had been attacked without realizing the danger she was in. On October 29, 2012, the jury found Giselle Esteban guilty of first-degree murder. She showed almost no reaction when the verdict was announced. On December 10, 2012, Judge John Rolifson sentenced her to 25 years to life in state prison. The judge said the evidence of premeditation was extraordinarily strong and criticized Giselle's lack of remorse. Giselle later told a probation officer that if she had been a juror, she probably would have voted for conviction herself, although she continued to say that she felt wrongly convicted. Michelle's relatives were forced to accept that a sentence of 25 years to life could eventually lead to parole hearings, meaning they might one day have to return and argue against her release. Michael Lee was deeply affected by the loss of his sister. He remembered Michelle's plan to follow their late mother into nursing and dedicate her life to helping others. For the family, her murder destroyed a future that had been built around service, education, and care. Prosecutors said Giselle's motive was jealousy. She falsely believed Michelle was romantically involved with Scott Marasigan and blamed Michelle for the collapse of her own relationship and family. Michelle had once briefly dated Scott years earlier, but by the time of the murder, they were simply friends. Nothing could bring Michelle back, but her family wanted her to be remembered for who she was, rather than only for the crime that ended her life. The source text also states that Michelle's family intended to remain involved whenever Giselle became eligible for parole, and that they wanted decision-makers to remember the brutality and premeditation involved in the crime. Judge Rolifson made clear at sentencing that genuine remorse would be important if Giselle were ever considered for release. Shortly after her arrest, Giselle gave birth to a son while in custody. Public records at the time did not identify the child's father. Rumors circulated about Scott Marasigan, but the source narrative says he denied being the father. The source narrative further states that Michelle's family continued volunteer work aimed at helping other families dealing with missing loved ones and trying to raise awareness about missing person cases. Michael said that believing Michelle was now with their mother in heaven helped him cope with the loss. When Michelle first disappeared, her father spent Father's Day participating in the search. He had always been proud of how hardworking and busy his daughter was, but later regretted not asking her to spend that Father's Day with him. He wished he could return to the past for just one day and invite her to celebrate it together. After the trial, the family tried to turn grief and anger into something meaningful, and according to the source text, created an organization in Michelle's memory called the Michelle Le Foundation, intended to support families searching for missing relatives. According to the source, the organization held events and fundraising activities to support search efforts and shared guidance with families about what to do during the crucial first hours after a loved one disappears. It also states that on Michelle's birthday, friends, relatives, and people helped by the organization gathered to remember her personality and celebrate her life. Flowers were brought and white balloons were released into the sky as symbols of hope and remembrance. The source additionally says that Scott became involved in this work, dedicated himself to raising his daughter, and tried to help other families avoid similar tragedies. As for Giselle, the source portrays her continued lack of remorse and emotional detachment as a lasting symbol of how jealousy, resentment, and obsession can become destructive. Michelle's story is remembered not only because of the calculated way in which she was stalked and killed, but also because of the enormous effort her family, friends, police, and volunteers made to find her and bring her killer to justice. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.